Okay, we've let the minute pass and now we can start. So hi everyone, welcome to our session of the Software Source Code Interest Group. Our subject today is existing efforts and practices related to software source code in academia, and especially just a community update on what's going on about software and software source code. I'm Moran Greenpeter. I work at the INRIA Research Center for the Software Heritage team. I am a software engineer and a metadata specialist for the Software Heritage Archive. So a little bit of housekeeping. We have put in the chat the collaborative notes and these slides if you want to follow the presentation on your own. And please add your name to the participant list in the slides. It helps us stay in touch and see who's here. If you have questions, please ask on the chat and raise your hand if you want to speak. And please be aware that this session is recorded. We have a very full agenda. I want to put you also to work with some group activity, but before that, we have some things to cover. First, I will introduce to you the software source code interest group for those that are following us from the beginning, but also for the newcomers that are just here now today. Then we'll have some first icebreaker activity. We'll continue with a presentation of the software source code identification working group output, which was launched and through this interest group. Then a very short introduction to the FAIR for Research Software Working Group that we have a session in a few in a few hours tomorrow, and then we'll have a presentation about the software citation implementation working group. That's the 411 working group, and some other ongoing efforts. Again, it's an update of what's happening around software in academia. And finally, we'll get to our group activity, and I hope you will be very active collecting those existing practices. So this software source code interest group, as I have a very nice slide after that about the chronology, but first let me present the co-chairs of this interest group. We have Neil Chu Hong, Julia Collins, Roberto Di Cosmo, and Mingfang Wu. I'm today's VP16 coordinator, and I work closely with Roberto Di Cosmo on software heritage. The objectives of this interest group is creating a forum for discussing research software inside RDA. When it started, it was the only place, and now we see that it created some kind of other activities. So it's really nice. We're dealing with issues on management, sharing, discovery, archival, and provenance of software source codes, and we want to pay special attention to source code that generates research data and plays an important role in scientific publications. Oh. Yeah, sorry about that. So the chronology of this interest group started in 2017 through Birds of a Feathers in Barcelona, where we had 60 participants. And during this Birds of a Feathers, we launched this interest group, which presented at a few plenaries. What's most important here on this slide, so you can go and click on the links on your own and see what kind of activities we did do during those last 3 years. But the thing that is important, that through this interest group, we have launched 2 different working groups, the software source code identification working group, and the FAIR for Research Software working group. And today we are here in Costa Rica virtually, and we want to see where this working group is going. Here are the related groups that I was talking about, and another very nice working group that is related to our work is the 4C-level software citation implementation working group. As you may figure it out, citation is very important for research software, so it's something that's combined in things that should be discussed also here at the software source code interest group. During the VP16 session plenary, we have many sessions about software. So I've taken the time to prepare the list, and I sent also to the mailing list. I hope you will try to see what's been discussed here at VP16. So research software in open science. Why do we want to address software source code? So source code, differently than executables, is a window to the knowledge that the software capture. So as Len Schustek from the Computer History Museum said, software source code provides a view into the mind of the designer. So if you have the code, you have the knowledge. Here, I've put an example of an Apollo 11 routine, the ignition routine, where it's written in the text, noli se tangere, which is do not touch. And this is something that you wouldn't be able to have without the source code preserved and visible. So now it's up to you, because I'm going to send you to your first activity, which is the icebreaker question. Why are you interested in software source code? Something like, why are you here on this session? And please go to the chat. I'm going to paste again the collaborative notes and the slides, and you can go to the notes and start on answering that on the icebreaker section, which is on page, let me see, page, I see someone already there. So it's page 3. So please, when you do that, you can also add yourself into the participants list, and then scroll a little bit down to the question, why are you interested in software source code? We'll give you a few minutes to answer that. I know it's sometimes it's a tackle to give you this activity 10 minutes into the session, but I think that will give us some kind of a way to continue with your input. I see I have a hand raised. Carlo, do you want to talk? Do you want to speak?
Yes, thank you. No, it's just a question for understanding the framework, because you discussed about open science. So I was wondering if we are immediately in the context of open software or open.
Well, this is an interesting question. For now, yeah, go ahead.
Because for concluding, for me, we can do open science with closed code. I can write a text which is completely open if I use Word, which is a proprietary software. So the question for software, are we in the open code?
I agree that it is a very important question and an interesting question. Now, since the name of the interest group is software source code, we're looking at the code and being able to look at the code, at the source code, or identifying it or working with that. We need to evaluate the question about openness. I agree. I think that's a good question that you put here. I will suggest that you keep it for the next steps question for the working group. Today, I didn't have anything planned about openness on discussing if it should be or shouldn't be open. I agree that on my last slide, there was the saying open science, and I didn't describe the diagram that I will show you now, maybe just a moment, no, which is about open, the triangle about open source repositories, open access repository, and open data sets. So this is really the three pillars of open science, having access to these research elements. But again, today we are not going to focus that now. We can keep that for later on discussion on the breakout room, where we do discuss practices, and we can say that openness should be discussed as an software source code practice. Does this answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. 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 How is it going on the notes? Did you manage to have some ideas on source code? Oh, I see many people have answered that. Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you very much for participating in this. When you imagine a question, you never know if it's going to work. So I'm going to let you finish that on your own time if you want, and I will continue with the presentation here. The first presentation was about the software source code identification working group output, which is called Use Cases and Identifier Schemes for Persistent Software Source Code Identification. This working group was led by the co-chairs Roberto Di Cosmo, Martin Fenner, and Daniel S. Katz, which he is with us today, but he will present the Force 11 working group. We have the Secretariat Liaison Stephanie Kieters, which I thank a lot for her help with publishing the report, the output. And you could go to that page and have links to the output directly, to the output card, and see what happened with this output. Also, this output was a collaborative work from a very interesting panel of authors that you have on this page, and I will not read. The software source code identification working goal was to capture and analyze software identification state of the art in the scholarly ecosystem. Its structure was first a definition section where we defined actors in the scholarly ecosystem, and the granularity of software, which is the software target that we want to identify, and some kind of what is at stake when identifying software. We have collected a very long and nicely done collection of use cases, following some high-level action, archiving, referencing, describing, and citing. And we then describe on this document two types of identifier schemes, the intrinsic identifiers and the extrinsic identifiers, with kind of a summary of findings. Today, I will do a very short presentation of that with only one intrinsic identifier and one extrinsic identifier. So first, what do we want to identify? That was the main issue of the report, that we don't necessarily know what we want to identify, and it depends on the purpose of the identification. So we have established definition of granularity levels, where the project is the highest granularity when where you have one project can contain multiple project version and multiple modules, which then can be dissected to submodules. Each of that element can have snapshot. What snapshot is a repository state with all the branches of the source code development history. Then you have releases, which are tags on specific elements in the development history. You have commits that are dated, and then smaller elements, directories, files, and even code fragments. All of these are elements that you can and you might want to identify and reference, and it depends on the use case, how to do it and what do you want to achieve by identifying these elements. So here again, just a small excerpt from the output that I invite you to go and read is the use case collection. We have an actor which we defined in the beginning of the beginning of the document. Then we have a use case description and the action. So we tag this with a specific action and the identification target. So here you can see for the use cases that I've put here, there are use cases about citation manager, creation of the software citation entries, and so on. I really invite you to go and read the use case collection that's on the document. And on the section about the identifier schemes, we have a very nice panorama of the identifiers that are already in use for software. We have the DOI with the Zenodo integration. We have the Wikidata item identifier and RRIDs. Also a nice description of how to identify with ARCs, and some registry identifier ASL.net and the SW Math registry, which is for mathematical software. In the intrinsic part, we have the SCID, which is the software heritage identifier. If you don't know about that, I'm going to keep this to the next slide. So the software heritage identifier, which we call the SCID, is intrinsic because it's intimately bound to the object, is calculated from the object, and it follows the versions control systems way to identify all the objects in the system. It's unique and it's like a digital fingerprint. It's centralized and does not need a registry, only an agreement on a standard. So you can compute the identifier on your own machine, which I will not show today. And it's cryptographically strong. So here, when you look at the identifier, you see the core identifier, which is this part at the top, sorry, at the top. And here you have the prefix of the identifier scheme. You have the scheme version. You have the object type. Here we have a content, which is a file. And in this file, you can find even the lines of the file with additional parameter and all the context from where the file came from. This specific identifier is the same element that I'm showing you on the first, well, not the first slide, but earlier when I show you the ignition routine of the Apollo 11. Next, we have one extrinsic identifier that I will present today, which is the HAL ID. The HAL ID is the identifier for objects that are archived in the HAL National Archive, which is the French National Archive, where we have the possibility to deposit software, specifically software artifacts. So the software researcher comes and submits the software deposit, like in Zenodo or any other archival repository. Then on the HAL platform, there is a moderator that will review the deposit, and they will review if the metadata matches the software that was deposited. After this moderation has in place, it validates the deposit, and the deposit gets an identifier, which is an extrinsic identifier of the HAL repository, and this will be a HAL ID. Then the deposit is sent to software heritage, and the same deposit will be also archived in software heritage, and will get an intrinsic ID, which will be then available on the record on HAL. So to conclude the output, the software identification, software source code identification output, we have this very scary table, which has all the granularity levels that we identified at the beginning with the project version, the module, etc., etc. And then we have this review of all the identifiers that we have seen. So SCIDs are not, we cannot identify a project with a SCID because a project is not a software artifact. It's a collection of art. It can be a representation of a collection of artifacts. But then the archived software artifacts can be then referenced with a SCID. So it is important to have this notion of both extrinsic identifiers and intrinsic identifiers. And this is the thing that we have seen on the software source code identification output. So the working group, the other one has now completed its work, and our interest group here is going to keep the maintenance of this output and see what we need as next steps for software identification. So a phrase that I copied from the output is the next step would be to produce a set of recommendations based on these findings, because it is only a state of the art, which is a good thing because everything is written in the same place, but we still need some recommendation on that. So that's it for the output. If you have any questions, maybe it's maybe put it in the chat and I'll circle back to that later. So I'll continue a little bit, just one slide on the FAIR for Research Software Working Group. It's not that slide, it's the next slide. So first I will say that it's a joint effort between RDA, RESA, and Force 11. And maybe I didn't say that for the software source code identification working group, that was also a joint Force 11 and RDA working group. That's why you had the Force 11 banner all through that part. And for the FAIR for Research Software Working Group, we also have some really nice work going on that working group, and many deliverables are awaited for that. But if you want to know more about that, you should come to the Breakout 6, which will be tomorrow, very late at night for me. I don't know what time it's for you. So for this working group, we have 5 co-chairs, Paula Martinez, Michelle Barker, Daniel Katz, which is here also on our call, Leila Garcia, and Il Chu Hong, and we have a few other people as a committee members, which I am part of also, and Fotis Somboros, and Jen Hauer, and Carlos Martinez. The objective of this working group is coordinating a range of existing community-led discussions and having a community definition of FAIR principle for research software. So come to the Breakout 6. Now I will stop talking. You have heard me enough, and I will give the floor to Dan. Dan, would you like me to continue sharing the slides?
Sure, and that's probably best. So
okay,
we go on then?
Yeah, let's go on.
Okay, so yeah, so I'm going to talk about the Force 11 Software Citation Implementation Working Group. I believe Neil Chu Hong is also on, or at least I saw him briefly before. Yep, he's there. So he and I and Martin Fenner are co-leading this activity. This is a follow-on from a previous Force 11 working group that I co-led with Arfin Smith and Kyle Niemeyer. And in that group, we developed a set of software citation principles along with probably 50 or 60 other members of the group that where we all worked together to do that. Once we did that, we then kind of initially thought, okay, we're done. And then very quickly we realized that the principles are only the first point, and now we actually have to get people to implement the principles. And so that's where this group came in. So our objective is to produce concrete guidance for software citation and then to implement them with a bunch of different groups of people, including developers, repositories, registries, publishers, indexers, and institutions. And so this group has been going actually for what seems like a very long time at this point. Probably longer than Force 11 really allows, but nobody's told us to stop, so we're going to keep going. And what we've basically turned into right now is kind of a meeting point where we once a month have calls where people can talk about interesting new projects and share interesting work that goes on. And we also coordinate some task forces that are more active than just meeting once a month. So there's a guidance task force, which is basically finished, that I will talk about in a minute. A journals task force that's pretty active at this point. Repositories task force, which has been active and then wasn't and now is again. And a CodeMeta task force that also is getting hopefully close to wrapping up its work. So should we go on?
Here you go.
Okay, so the guidance task force, which Neil led, developed guidance for different stakeholders, very specific guidance to help them implement software citation. And principally that's focused on authors of articles and developers of software. So authors of articles who want to cite software and developers of software who want to make their software citable. And so this task force developed and published 2 checklists. A software citation checklist for authors, and again, that's authors of papers, not authors of software, and a software citation checklist for developers of software. And this also then developed this developed a software citation primer that is used as the basis for a paper from the next task force. Actually, I'm not completely sure I agree with that, but I guess I'll talk with Neil about this offline. And this guidance task force then is basically done for this period while the journals task force is kind of taken over and taking this information and sending it out to a different audience. Okay, so next. Okay, so the journals task force that I'm leading is trying to work with different organizations that publish journals, proceedings, monographs, other things, to improve how software is cited in these works and how it works throughout the scholarly processing, publishing and processing ecosystem. It's called the Journals Task Force, but it's not really intended to be just for journals. Journals is kind of the placeholder here. And so what we've done is we've published a paper that is in peer review, and it's this F1000 research, the importance of software citation. The thing that's interesting, which is probably very hard to see in the slide, unfortunately, is that there are 23 authors, and those authors represent something like 18, mostly fairly large publishers, some smaller publishers as well. So we're really trying to work very hard to make sure that we are really working within the publishing community and working in a consensus basis to develop a high-level guidelines, high-level guidance that those communities can use. And our intention is that the different communities, whether it's a large publisher or a disciplinary publisher or somebody else, will publish a version of this document that has examples that are the right examples for their community and the citation styles that are the right citation styles for their kind of publications. And then we'll have kind of this master document along with a set of very customized documents that each of those different groups can use directly. So the next thing that we're really working on is we're working to figure out kind of what happens then after these articles are submitted, after people put citations into an article. How do those citations actually go through the possibly third-party group that does processing and turns it into a PDF, and then eventually turns it into something that gets to an indexer, like I don't know, like Crossref as an example. So how do we ensure that the citations survive through that entire process without losing anything? And the other thing that's going on here is that we're actively looking for people to talk to their communities about this and to encourage their publishers, if they're not authors, to support this, and to encourage authors and reviewers in this community to follow this guidance. Okay, next, please. Okay. The Repositories Task Force, which is being led by Alice Allen, has as its objective bringing together representatives of research software registries and repositories to talk about how they do things and to improve those things. So this task force drafted a quick, actually kind of a couple of quick start guides for research software registries and repositories. And it's basically a best practices document. They're trying to have this out by the end of this year. They've also been working on a guidance document for users and communities, again, for best practices in this area. They're working on code that takes information from a Python setup config file and generates a CodeMeta.json file. And Moran will talk about why that's important in maybe 2 more slides or maybe 1 more slide. We had a workshop for discipline-specific software registries and repositories, and I should mention this was funded by the Sloan Foundation, so thanks to Josh, who I think is on as well, in November of last year. And that basically got people together to work on the documents that are mentioned already, but also to work on some other documents, including something that's being called a good enough workflow for software citation. This task force kind of stalled for quite a bit around March and April, and it's now just in the process of restarting and then getting going again. And so this end of 2020 release for the first document is based on this kind of restart at this point. Okay.
Thank you, Dan. I'm going to take this task force presentation. So CodeMeta Task Force is also part of the 4C11 Software Citation Implementation Working Group. In this task force, we have the objective to express all CodeMeta properties in using schema.org, but maybe you don't know what's CodeMeta about, and I will talk about that in 1 slide. The steps we've taken to do so: we had an internal task force discussion, then we had open issues in the CodeMeta repository with a list of the properties that we want to integrate into schema.org, as you see here on the slide. Then we had the third step, which is not yet finished, which is validating and integrating this proposal in the next CodeMeta release, the version 3. And the last one would be to prepare a formal proposal to schema.org to integrate these properties that are only in CodeMeta now. So to understand CodeMeta, I prepared this slide about the CodeMeta initiative, which is a subset of the schema.org vocabulary. It's an academic community discussing software metadata. And the thing that's most interesting with the CodeMeta project is the crosswalk table, which is crosswalking different vocabularies that are describing software. So here on this slide, you have a map of these software schemes and general schemes that some of them are crosswalk to CodeMeta, some aren't, but you can see that there are four major categories. You have catalogs and registries in blue. You have scholarly ecosystem vocabularies in purple, and linked data in red, and digital preservation vocabularies in kind of yellow. So Wikidata is good for digital preservation, and there are some working groups doing that as well, but it's both linked in orange to linked data and digital preservation. So you can see that also through the crosswalk table, that those vocabularies have different properties, but for things that are have the same meaning. Something else about CodeMeta is the CodeMeta generator. It's a tool that's online on the CodeMeta website that you can see. You can link here to see the hosted version on the CodeMeta website, or directly to go to the code repository where you are welcome to contribute. So this CodeMeta generator is for the creation of CodeMeta.json files. These files are suggested to be held inside the repository, so you can keep the metadata in the source code, so that the metadata of the software, the descriptive metadata about who are the authors and what's the software about, can be kept in the software source code and then archived with the source code. That way, the metadata is not lost if a registry is closed, and if you have the artifact itself somewhere, you can have the metadata with it. So this CodeMeta generator was contributed to the community by Software Heritage, the developers team. Okay, that's a very different subject. So I'm going to go back to this slide before I'm going to continue. So here we finished a little bit about the software citation part of the updates, where we had a very interesting presentation about the Force 11 work. And I invite you to join the mailing list if you're interested in software citation and see what's happening on the GitHub repository. The link is in the slides. Again, if software citation is a big part of software in academia, and this is important to be part of this conversation. Now we'll take you to another subject, which is FAIR. Maybe I should have had that before, but another initiative, the FAIR project, where we have released recently an assessment report on fairness of software, which was written by the people here on the slide and reviewed by the FAIR for Research Software Steering Committee. And this document is open to consultation. You have the link in the slides, and there will be a webinar presenting this report on November 23rd if you are interested in FAIR and software. The next slide is also something very different. It's about the EOSC scholarly infrastructure for research software. Again, here we are in a full update of everything. So there's a link to the document, but the consultation ended today. It is a very interesting document where you can also find a very interesting discussion on the comments. So I do invite you to go check that out. That's about the infrastructure that cater research software. In this task force, there were representatives from 9 different infrastructure, European infrastructure, because it's the EOSC is the European Open Science Cloud. We have for the archives, HAL, Software Heritage, and Zenodo. For the publishers, Dagstuhl, eLife, and IPOL. And for the aggregators, we had OpenAir, ScanR, and SWMeth. A different thing to see on this scholarly infrastructure report is that they identify 4 pillars: archive, reference, describe, and credit. And it is a state of the art of best practices and open problems. So it's a very full document. So if you are interested in research software, it is good to go this document, which is really a complete document on these subjects. I think I got to the end of no, I didn't get to the end. Oh yes, we have Risa. I will ask Dan to present this slide, please. Dan, if you can.
Yeah, thanks. So RISA is the Research Software Alliance. When we started RISA, we were actually kind of thinking in some sense that we had RDA that was working in trying to coordinate a lot of different data activities, and we had Force 11 that was trying to coordinate a bunch of different scholarly publishing activities and scholarly communication, but we didn't really have an equivalent for software. And so RISA is intended in some sense to be that equivalent for software, a group of people and organizations that come together to collaborate on advancing research software. And we, in particular, want to get to the point where software, and research software specifically, is recognized and valued as a fundamental and vital component of research worldwide. So RISA works primarily through task forces, which are kind of like RDA working groups and interest groups, at least at this point. We have done a software landscape analysis that led to a blog. We've created a set of evidence for the importance of research software, which is really more a repository of evidence that other people have collected. It's not that we've collected our own evidence. And we are in the process of building a register of research software funding opportunities, in addition to working on the Fair for Software, Fair for Research software activity that Moran's talked about before.
Thank you, Dan.
Oh, sorry, and I should just, one last thing is that if you're interested in this, we also are looking, we're very eager to have more people join. And so if you click on one of the links there, you can join and get our mailing list and get our newsletter and become active in task forces or anything else. Thanks.
Excellent. I was going to ask about that if RISA wants people to join the task forces. So thank you for that information. So here we got to the end of the presentation, which is the full live presentation. Now it's you who are going to start working, because we have a kind of an activity about practices collection. We want to collect practices. I wasn't sure how many we will be. Now I see that we are 23 participants. I'm not sure if we should divide to 2 or 3 breakout rooms, or should we have a full discussion here? It depends on what you think. So I will ask you to vote on your Zoom. So if you are for breakout rooms to discuss in a more small setting, just click on yes. And if you prefer the full discussion here on the main room, please click on no. If you don't know what I'm talking about, do so in the chat. Just say if you are for one option or the other. And then if you are, it's about really discussing together about your practices. If you are in a kind of a place where you create software or you use software, and see what are the best practices that you are using and you are following. So let's see if there are people that are voting. There's a lot of no's. People want to stay here to discuss it here. So yes, let's go and discuss that here. Do we? Oh, I have a few green. Let me wait a minute so maybe some of the other people participating can vote. So I will say it again. To vote, click on the yes or no buttons on the participant list. It's in, well, if I don't want to stop sharing my screen, so it will be difficult for me to show you. But, oh yes, maybe I can do that. I will do that here. Yeah, you can see that. So here you have a yes, here you have a no, and then you can vote. Didn't want to show everybody the other votes, so I will repeat the question. So yes, the question is, if you want us to discuss these subjects of collecting practices, or even if you want to just discuss other things that are related to software source code here in breakout rooms, in small groups, vote yes. If it's in the large group, vote no. So we'll stay all together and we can discuss together the subject that you are interested in and the practices that you have been following or that you know about.
So Moran, I think we have 12 no's, which I think is over half. So we should probably just assume that we're at no and go on.
Yeah, let's assume that we are at no. Okay. Yes. Okay. So I will invite if someone has something to say to the large group, if not, I will maybe propose a roundtable. We are 23. It might take a lot of time to do a roundtable about presenting who's here on the call. So let's stop. I will stop sharing the screen. Okay. Okay. And I will ask you to, the ones that want to have a camera on, to have the camera on, and we can do that discussion now as well. Well, 23 people is not a lot of people, so we can do that. Hi, that's nice. That's the problem with virtual plenaries. You don't know who's who's there, who's listening. Oh, that's very nice seeing you people. Maybe I can go back to the question that I had in the beginning of the session about openness. Does someone want to add anything to that about open science, open source code? Is this a practice that we want to, what do you think about that? I see Carlo, you want to say? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I think that, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect. I think that the problem about openness is not important while we deal with citation of code. It's like in publication, we can cite a publication which is in a commercial edition, or we can cite a free publication which is in HAL, for example. So is it important to distinguish the open and close aspect for citation? I don't think so. So when it is important to have an idea of what kind of openness, I don't speak about license because the license is not important. We may have a GPL or BSD. Openness is maybe, for example, a CC0 where you cannot modify the code, but you have access and you can study the code. So for resuming, I think that openness is not important for citation. So do you deal with closed code citation in your working group? And what about the openness in general? And sorry for the kids' noise, but it's a wrong time in Europe.
That's okay. Then I see you want to answer. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that I think that if we're talking about citation, we completely agree with you. That's what the principals have said, and that's where we're heading with in terms of the documentation as well, that it's important to cite software no matter if it's open or closed. But how you actually cite it is probably different, and how you preserve it is different, and a bunch of other things become different. And so certainly for citation, it's important to cite any software that you use that's important to your research. But in this overall group, which isn't just citation, I think there are other aspects that that are specific to open source software. In particular, if we're talking about source code identification, it's hard to even think about how we could identify source code if we can't see the source code.
Yes, Josh, go ahead.
One thing that I'd just add is, because I was thinking through, and I think the point about citation makes sense, but that's assuming code is a single sort of unified entity. And I've been spending, I think I've been in a lot of conversations thinking about software as sort of chains of dependencies. And if you don't have open source, it'll be quite difficult to determine what are the underlying dependencies on which a given cited work rests, which is a different notion of citation as sort of looking at the sort of relationships of citations rather than just the citation of a single unitary piece of code.
Thank you, Josh. I agree that for citation, there are aspects that you need to consider for proprietary software that you want to cite. I think the thing is that here it's an overall group that's not only focused on citation. So you have the Force 11 group that is focused on citation. And there we have discussed partly this subject. So here in software source code interest group, your question is very relevant. So also because source code, talking about source code without having it open is a bit difficult, I believe. Do anyone want to add something about openness? Oh, I see hands raised hand. Neil, please, yes.
I think Walmart was ahead of me, so I'll let him go first.
Okay, sorry, I saw you both at the same. Yeah, go ahead, Walmart.
Okay, so I'm not sure if this is specifically about openness. So maybe if Neil's comment is about openness, maybe he can proceed.
Okay. So yeah, I was going to talk about something that I think was a question earlier on in this session as well, and I wondered what people's thoughts were on whether you can do open science without being able to visibly inspect the code of software, or at least understand what it does. So I appreciate the comment that you can do you can in theory do open science with closed source and proprietary software, but can you do open science without the ability to inspect the source code of that software?
Can I just want to jump in for a second and try to partly answer that. Sorry, I can't put up my hand since I'm a co-host. And so I may be jumping in front of Omar as well. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, okay. So I think the only thing I was going to say is that this question comes up with data as well, and I think there clearly is data that cannot be completely open, and I feel like there probably also is software that cannot be completely open, and so I guess my feeling is that there's probably a spectrum of openness rather than saying that it's either open or closed. That if the software is not open or if the data is limited, it's not the science overall is not going to be as open, but it can still be somewhere reasonably far along that line, right? It's not preferable, but in some cases it may be required.
Thank you, Dan. So let's go to Walmart.
All right, so this is on a slightly different strand, I think, and I imagine that there should be something like reference managers for research software, because I mean, software is not something that's simple, and when you develop code, you rely on tons of packages, and there's IT security issues and things like that, which is way beyond most researchers. I mean, both their interests and also their main proficiencies. So there should be tools to help people write code and use research software in a kind of controlled manner without having to kind of rely on one specific software that does everything. I mean, if you buy SPSS or one of these kind of commercial tools, you're in the safe, but at the same time, you're also in the closed source. Or if you want to share your code and make it available to everyone, that's not really the same thing. You can make your scripts available, but you won't be able to run it unless you buy the software. So I think that there should be a conversation about how to make similar curation efforts in the open source community.
Thank you, Walmart. I see Christian want to yes. answer.
So I think it's not the only problem. You talk about having a script that you cannot rerun because you don't have the MATLAB or SPSS or something else. But in research institutes, sometimes you have PhD students, and then you have very specific code that you cannot rerun anyway. So I think it's more important, at least, to provide a way for these people at least to reference and deposit those software, even if you know you cannot rerun, at least you can make sense of the code, even if you don't have the whole stack of software available.
I completely agree with you. Yes, the knowledge is in the written code. So even if you don't have it running, or you can't execute it or reproduce it, you can read it and have you have the piece of the research that's kept. I see a hand raised, Ziming Zhao.
Yes, that's me, Jimin Zhao from University of Amsterdam. I have actually 2 points here. Regarding these, the openness, I think it's important things we have to encourage these contextual connections between the algorithms and the software. We have actually some experience, if you want to, if the student want to use the code from somebody else to test the algorithm, if these, the algorithm itself is not well explained, even you get the code, and it takes lots of time to find it out how it works and to understand the logic between the input and the output. To me, so this is one thing. Basically, from a metadata level, we need some kind of agreement or guidelines for the producer. But on the other hand, if we look at these from a reproducibility point of view, sometimes the openness is not that important, because these things, if we know exactly the algorithms, we know the inputs, we know how the thing's supposed to work. Basically, people just care is, can they tune the input, get the kind of expected output based on that algorithms? And do they have to, open the source code to touch them? So this isn't it. It's also something, in many cases, I would say, just like when we move in the service-oriented world, you actually get away from the source code. So this, if you put this in open science context, probably we need to differentiate these scenarios. So this basically, the two points I would like to address. Thanks.
I agree that for different use cases, you need different elements. So for the reproducibility, yes, source code might not be the best thing that you put your hands on, but it depends on the context of the software itself. So I agree with that. One of the objectives of this working group, interest group, was coming with the use cases. So we did come up with the use case collection for the identification part. Maybe further work on collecting and describing the use cases and what is possible with open source code or with other elements or without open source code is something that can be done through this interest group. I see Jonathan hand. Yes, please.
Yeah, I actually wanted to give an example of something where it's really important to have the code, even if you know it. So in my background's from atmospheric science. When you're running computer models that are solving differential equations simultaneously, numerical stability is a big problem, and you might have the equations, actually primitive equations for the atmosphere in any old textbook. How you can solve that with numerical stability is a real big problem, and having the code where somebody else has already figured out how to make these problems sort out is great. I don't want to rewrite all my model. I want to use somebody else who's already figured this out 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So there are examples where I totally agree that we'd rather you need to know what the inputs and outputs are, know what the equations are or whatever, but there are other examples.
So you can also say that it depends also on the discipline, on the domain of the software. So I agree that that's another thing to keep in mind. Anyone else want to say something about openness now that we have tackled this from many angles? I see Walmart again. Yeah, are you raising your hand? No, or not?
Yep, I did.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm thinking I'm not sure if you're familiar with Bioconda, but it's kind of a repository of software specifically made for bioinformatics analysis, and it's tailored for people using Linux and Mac OS mainly. But I mean, those kinds of channels are very useful for those communities, and it would be nice to see more of these and kind of encourage these efforts for kind of software stacks or pipelines that researchers can reuse, and maybe not just for Linux and Mac OS users, but also for Windows users. So I'm wondering kind of what makes this happen and how can we make it happen across more disciplines?
That's a good point. We can add that to our list of practices, having this type of, if you can add it yourself, I will much appreciate it. It's on the notes. There's all our breakout room title. So we are all, because we are stayed all in the same room, and we can add this example as kind of a practice that's a good practice. I see Fernando has his hand. Can you?
Yes, I just wanted to make a short comment about the open source is regarding what the code is supposed to do. Somebody just said that it was nobody actually looks at the code. If you're using a code that is supposed to do something, you know the algorithm, and it's supposed to do something, and you just use it. And it's important to have the open source because there is always a big difference in between what are you supposed to do, what are you are trying and you think you are doing, and what is the machine actually doing, the computer doing when it executes the algorithm. So it's in order to pick up the difference between the actual behavior and the supposed behavior, you need to have open source.
Exactly. Yes, this is a good point as well to put in. Analyzing the behavior of the software with the source code. Thank you, Fernando. Do we have any hands up? I don't see any. Oh, yes, Julia, go ahead.
Yeah, do you want us to go ahead and, oh, it looks like people are filling in the breakout room grid. So that was going to be my question is, should I start typing there? So
thank you, Julia. It's I was going to end the openness discussion, even though I kind of wanted it to be transcribed in the notes, but no worries, I will do it with the video later. And I will invite you all to go to the grid on the notes and answer that, because I think that we have a really good collection here of participants, that you have different visions because you come from different places, and I really appreciate that. So if you can go to the grid is we have two main questions, which is the first one: do you or your organization create software or use software? And the second question is about following community best practices with the source code you create, if you create software. If you don't create software or you just use software, you can also answer this question with best practices on using, and maybe in the terms of maintaining your workflow with software, if you have some practices about existing practices in your organization that do consider how to keep the software. Do you keep the software in-house? Do you need to archive it somewhere? Do you how do you reference the software, identify the software, this type of practices? So I see that the grid is starting to get filled in. I will let you do that in silence for a few minutes. Let's take 5 minutes to do it, and then we can discuss the items that are inserted. And I will have also questions later on about the continuation of this interest group and what would you want to see here discussed in the next plenary. So keep that in mind for after this activity. I also see that we have very interesting comments in the chat that we can, I'm pointing it out so you can go and read the chat. I will see if some of this comes up also in the practices collection. I see that Dan is going to start an interest group or working group on the topic of FAIR for ML. Do you want to present that? Dan?
Well, I don't think that there's very much that I can say at this point. There's one project that I'm working on for which this is important. And because of that, I sent a note on Twitter asking for other people that felt like this might be important, and got, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 other people that also seem to be interested for their own projects or just in general. And so we together wrote a poster, which is poster 31B. So if you go to poster 31B in just under 2 hours, I think is today's poster session, and the same time tomorrow, you can at least see that. Well, you can see it anytime, but you can talk to me or others that are there, assuming somebody shows up, which will be interesting to see how these poster sessions work. But the intent was just to see if there's enough people that are interested that we should create an interest group or a working group and talk about this. Or if people think that FAIR for machine learning models really is the same as the FAIR principles for data, and we don't need to do anything and we're done, that would also be an interesting point of view.
Thank you, Dan. I see in Jonathan's comment about the expected quality of the code for when it's on a release. If you want Jonathan to comment that live.
Sure. It was kind of following Julia's comment actually about trust in the software. And I know something I've heard and certainly thought to myself is, I can't make this public yet. It looks like crap. You know, it's not, well, I haven't documented it as well as I like, and these variable names aren't as great as they should be. So I can't release it yet. And, you know, you would expect those kind of things maybe to be done well or planned to do well if I was developing some sort of source code that I expected to share with the community. And it was that was like the primary output, as opposed to a script I wrote in MATLAB quickly to generate some figures for a paper. I might throw that together and maybe I wouldn't use as good documentation practices. So maybe there should be an understanding of this. And it seems like other people might agree.
I agree that there's a difference between the type of software that you develop and how you, what practices you follow when you do a small script on your own and when you do a complex software with a big team and maybe sub-modules and modules and a few releases. So yes, I understand completely. Julia, yes, Julia, you always see your hand now.
Following up on that. So I tried to capture that scenario in my entering the table because we definitely have that situation in our organization. We have a team of so-called professional software developers, of which I am one, and we have different goals or practices that we try to apply to our development practices. But a researcher who has a piece of code and they've developed a data product, they may include that code with that data product. It's supported by our user services team, but it doesn't go through the same sort of quality control checks. So I don't think we're going to come up with any solutions or insights. It just is, as Jonathan said, a fact that might be worth considering making more obvious or
I completely agree. I think do you have any documentation in your organization about that?
About how
quality
checks, or nothing that's formalized, but I can start trying to talk to people and try to summarize what's going on here.
So the practices are mostly practices that are not formal practices.
For people releasing or for support teams who are writing, say, some code that is associated with a particular data product, that team doesn't necessarily go through a rigorous set of software evaluation practices. If it works, it works. Okay. And it's distributed. And we are moving those codes to GitHub repositories, for example, so that they have a little more tracking, but in the past they weren't in those locations. When we're working on bigger projects, the software development team, we do have some better codified practices, you know, requiring tests. We do have those in either GitHub or Bitbucket. So it depends on where the source of the software is. And if it's of interest, I can try to better summarize NSIC's approach.
Thank you for sharing. So you say it's you try to make it change to be on GitHub. So is it on GitHub on a public repository or on a private repository?
For the code that is intended to support a public data product that we're distributing, those should be public repositories. Okay. So I need to confirm that, but that is the goal, as I understand it, is to try to make that more to put it in a repository, make it more formally managed in a way that we might manage other bigger software projects.
Okay, great.
I'll make a note to follow up and check these statements.
Thank you very much. So let me go and review your homework. If someone wants to share online, like live, the comment that he has written or she has written, you are free to raise your hand, but if not, I will just go through that and see. I see some comments about dependent on software. It's hard to see you and see the document, sorry. So there are some Git-based tools, versioning. That's very nice. You did some fine homework here. I don't see any links. Do you have any here? The one that answered here on the grid. Do you have any links on your organizational site about about practices or how-tos or guides that make it more formal that these things should be used about the development process? Nobody's raising their hand. I imagine that's because it's not formal, it's not written, it's not published. This type of practices that are used inside the institution or the organization. Or maybe you don't. Maybe the thing is that's not known. Maybe there are formal documentation somewhere and it's not published. So what I will do, I will use your nice grid and I will follow up on that on the mailing list. I'm not sure that you are all part of our software source code interest group mailing list. If you are not, we have the link in the notes at the beginning where you can go to the group page and register to the mailing list and get the mails on and updates. And we get to the final part of this session because we have 15 minutes left, maybe 17 minutes left. And I have 3 last questions for you in the next steps questions. I don't know if you got there yet. It's after the grid. The first question is, what subjects would you like to discuss during the next plenaries? Because this interest group is going to continue since it's an interest group and not a working group. We don't have a lifespan. We don't need to close. And I think that there is still interest in software source code here in RDA. And I would be very interested to know what you would like to discuss further, what types of activities you would like to have, maybe. During the next sessions, or if you want to say it out loud and live, so we can discuss it here to see if you want, if other people join this subject. I thought I saw a hand and I don't see it yet. I don't see it now. Okay. Then the next question is, what types of materials will you find helpful to have on the wiki page? And we have, I don't know if you know that, but on the RDA website, on the group page, there's a wiki. And on the wiki, there can be some wiki pages. We already have 3 wiki pages. 2 of them are about past plenaries, and one is about the fair for software reading materials, which was prepared for the last plenary, because that was the subject we discussed last plenary. So my question is, if you think that some of the materials that we presented today should be on the wiki, or if you have other ideas that we can have on the wiki that would be helpful for you to go back to that. That's the second question on which you can answer. So, and the third question is about mailing list updates. So if you want to, well, I imagine some of you are on the mailing list, and if you aren't on the mailing list, I hope that you will you'll get yourself onto the mailing list after this session. And the question is about the topics that you would like to see on this mailing list. We do send updates, but there are no regular mails that are sent. So just when there are updates, and specifically before plenaries, we do have more mails sent. And so if you want to see anything else on this mailing list, I would be happy to oblige. So let me get back to, I see that no hands are up to share some ideas and questions. So I will just read out that there are, I think, 5 or 6 votes for how to describe software with software metadata. I know we had few activities in the past about metadata, which was rough at the time because it was before we had other infrastructure ready for metadata. We didn't have the CodeMeta generator, for example. And so describing software with software metadata is a very interesting, I believe it's a very interesting subject, because I'm also, if you remember, the metadata specialist for software heritage. Then we have 3 votes for onboarding new users in version control. That's interesting. Wow, I didn't think about that. That's an interesting subject to do that. Do somebody want to comment that? Okay. Oh yes, Neil, thank you.
I guess it's just a question as to whether people have heard of the carpentries, and maybe one of the things to do is if people are really interested in this, maybe to be able to advertise that a little bit more and try and get some courses and workshops run online or nearby where you are at a time that suits. Although I know that so many people have been requesting this kind of training this year that I think they've now stopped taking open requests until the start of next year.
Thank you, Nick, for your comment. I would love you to put that in the document in a comment on the side, because it's a very good one. The carpentry is something that we can present also during this session, even if we don't do the complete onboarding with the version control, because I think it will take a lot of time and not be the thing that is adapted to all the participants of our RDA plenary. But we can present where it is available and where we can find information about that. So yes. The next one is quote quality assessment, quality of algorithm and the form of code. Really interesting subject. Yes, I agree. That can be something that we can discuss on the plenary session. Do anyone has remarks on that subject to keep in mind if we go and do that? Okay. The next one is community curated repository for trusted software artifacts. That's a good and interesting question. What are community curated repositories? Would anyone want to give an example on that?
Yeah, it's the same that I mentioned before with the, the Bioconda repository. So that's why I wrote it down here as well.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sure. Would you consider that a repository or registry, the Bioconda?
It actually contains the software artifacts, so I would say it's a repository. But I mean, a registry would also be useful, I guess. But well, I mean, just the, I mean, trust in general, and also this kind of curated collection of things that are used by many.
I think that's what threw me back is the repository part, but the assemble of curated and repository. But yes, thank you for precise saying that. Can I ask you to put a comment on that with the Bioconda example, so I can get back to it later. Thank you. And the last subject is basic literacy on dependency management and risk assessment. This is not voted yet. Do you want to go and vote about
I added that one. So that's basically a lot, or my experience is that when I teach data analysis using source code, a lot of people tend to use packages, whatever package they find, and install it from GitHub, which is potentially a large security risk, which means that most people don't really realize that you're executing arbitrary code on your computer. And even though you trust the person writing that code, they might have used packages that are unsafe and do funky stuff on your computer. So some basic literacy or checklists for people who aren't really interested in dependency management.
Excellent idea. I think that's a very good idea. It also gives a view of what it means to use software and have well, I agree with that idea, and I'm going to vote also. Okay, we are 8 minutes before the end of the session. The other two questions, I see that they are very small responses. So we have just two interesting materials proposed to the wiki materials, and I will be glad to oblige as well to this two proposals. I think that's a good thing to have in the wiki. If you have other ideas, you are free to put it down. And for the mailing list updates, nobody has suggested anything. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes before we close up to come up with ideas that you want to see on the mailing list topics. I know I'm making you work, but then I need to do all that. And I want to have a live interest group with interesting discussions. So I need your help, and you are very helpful. I see the icebreaker was really extraordinary. You had very, very good, interesting responses, and we had a very nice discussion. So I feel that you can help me with these 3 last questions before we close. Hopefully to see you again in a few months here on my screen, because I don't know if we will meet, or maybe Neil has more information about next plenary. Do you, Neil? Do you have more information about the next plenary?
I don't have enough updated information, as you can imagine. It's not the group that I'm in at Edinburgh that is organizing it, but I have been in touch with the organizers, and yes, I think keep watching the announcements, because it's it very much depends on where we are with with the pandemic.
Yes, I imagine it is. But yes, seeing you on the screen like that, it's nice. Not having a breakout room is also very nice. I think it was a good idea to stay all in the same room. And I really appreciated the discussion we had here. So let me see what you have written on the mailing list topics. Over-informed, yes, I know we get a lot of emails from RDA. I agree that it's okay. I accept this proposition. It's less work for me to write less emails. I will still read the other 4 topics that are suggested. Experience on implementation, adopting best practices, showcases, adoption stories. Then we have conferences, seminars, and training. And then there's can the wiki be configured to send updates where information is added here? That would be useful to remind. So what we can do, that's a good idea about the wiki. I don't think it can be automatically updated. And I think that's a bad idea in terms of spamming, because every time you do an update of a wiki page, then everybody sees that you have changed something, and it can be very an overload. But I can take this comment about the wiki and say that if by adding new pages to the wiki, we can do kind of announcement about that on the mailing list, so you can have this information. And I'm seeing that some of the things are shared also on the mailing list and on the wiki topics. So we can do this kind of announcement of the new pages that we add on the wiki when it's added. And there's the option of doing a summary on overall mail. Yes, that's a good thing to do. So we are 3 minutes to go. I would like to thank you all. I had a pleasure to see you here and to talk to you about software source code. I hope you had a nice time. Have anyone has last remarks before we close this session and continue our night to the night sessions? Okay, I see.
I guess so just really quickly, I'd say thank you very much for doing all the work of preparing the slides and all the discussions and leading everything very well. So thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Moran.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, everyone. And I will give you two minutes back if no one has anything to say. Again, it was a pleasure. And have a great other sessions. I hope to see you tonight at the FAIR roadmap, FAIR software roadmap session, and tomorrow at the FAIR for research software session. Have a great night or day. Bye.